dog collar is one of the simplest projects you could possibly make in leatherworking, but I'm going to make it a little bit more complicated just because that's what I do. Your basic dog collar is just going to be, you fold over about 3 inches on the end. That's going to be where you put the buckle. You need to put a slot in that, punch a couple holes for some rivets. Instead of a keeper, you're going to use usually a D-ring. And then you measure it out the same as you normally would. From there, once you have the buckle on it, you measure out to what your sizing hole is going to be for an 18-inch collar, which is what I'm making. You would measure to 18. That's your center hole. Add a couple holes on each side of it. And then past the last hole, you add about 3 inches just to have a little bit extra there that will catch in that D-ring you're using as a keeper and not flop around. So very, very simple. But I want to put right in the middle of it a round ring so that on the center of the collar there's a place to attach a leash to, or in this case a dog harness. So it takes a little bit more thought than normal for that, because I don't want it to wind up too close to one side or the other. I want it to be basically right in the middle of the collar. So the way that I'm going to do that is I had to do a little bit more math than normal. So this is what I came up with, and I'll explain the numbers. So again, just like before, we've got 3 inches. The buckle adds about a 1/2 inch onto the end of the strap. So I'm going 8.5 inches to get to the 9 inches, which would be my center point. And then I'll add about 3 inches back. That will be what folds over on that side to attach the ring on. Now that's not quite the correct amount because the ring's going to add some. The same with the other side. I've got 3 inches to fold it over where it attaches to the ring, 9 inches to the center sizing hole, 2 inches, which would be the extra 2 more sizing holes just in case, and then about 3 inches past that becomes just that little tail down on the end, the very billet end of it. 17. So that means that should be 17. And 3 plus 3 plus 8.5 is 14.5. But the ring, the loops attach into it, and it's going to leave, from what I could tell, about 1 inch once I've got the pieces on either side that it's going to add. So that means I need to take about a 1/2 inch off of each of these to get it in the center. Otherwise my collar is going to be just a little bit too long. So I'm going to need one piece that's about 16.5 inches and one piece that's about 14 inches. And that's going to be the side with the buckle. So now I have to keep these straight as I go, but that'll be pretty easy once we get started, because the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and cut the end of this one, the little bit longer one. It's going to be where the sizing holes are. I'm going to cut that to a strap point so I'll be able to tell them apart. I'll just use this little plastic template thing that I picked up from Tandy years ago. You can be more precise about that. I'm usually not. Okay, so now we know which side's which at least. So now, each of these is going to need one side feather skived down to where it'll fold over neat and clean whenever I go to put it through that ring. So that's going to be our next step. And this is a pretty stiff saddle skirting that I'm working with here. So it might be useful to wet it a little bit while I'm doing this. Normally when I wet a piece of leather, I try to wet the whole thing, just to prevent watermarks stains from showing up on it. Probably doesn't really matter on a piece of black leather like this. Definitely matters on anything that's a light brown color or even natural. And as usual, I'm just going to use my round knife to skive it off. This end that's going to be folded over the buckle, I'm just kind of rounding it off a little bit because it's going to be folded down. I just don't want points that stick out. But I will probably go ahead and take it to the splitter and split this thinner. Or at least, normally that's what I do. I can try it with just the round knife here, because that would be what somebody would have to do if they don't have that cool tool of a splitter. And basically on this stuff, I'm just splitting it down just a little bit, just enough to make it fold better. Because with a dog collar, you don't have to worry too much about. And most people don't even bother doing this. They just leave it full thickness, put bigger rivets in it. But I think it makes it fit nicer. Just make that a little bit thinner on that end. I'm just splitting down basically through, on this, I'm splitting through what's been dyed basically. And since I'm at it, I'm going to skive the end even thinner still. And as usual, now that we've got everything basically shaped and skived and cut to size and so on and ends rounded out, I'm going to take the edge beveler around. We're going to take the corners off a little bit so we don't have those sharp edges, so I can go back later and smooth it all out. I'm wetting this down again because I want to put a little bit of a crease around the edge. I'll kind of use it as a stitching groove line a little bit, but I don't want to actually groove into it. I just want a line that goes all the way around. I think it just makes straps look better if you just put a crease line. And it's pretty easy to do. You just wet the leather down and use a wing divider, or there's even tools specifically made to do the job. I think it just makes that strap look so much better having that line around the edge. And it's simple. This was a saddle skirting, so it was a pretty heavy leather. It was a 10 to 12 ounce. And a lot of times on those, it doesn't dye all the way through. Partially because they just don't want to stiffen up the leather as much. But sometimes you'll find something, especially latigos and things like that, that have been softened a little bit too as well, that are labeled as struck through. And that's a tannery term, meaning that the dye has soaked all the way in and goes all the way through the leather. You'll still sometimes find spots in them that aren't, but for the most part, I've had good luck with some of them. This hide, though, like I said, it was not labeled as that. This was just a saddle skirting that was drum dyed black, so it was just labeled as drum dyed, and I didn't expect it to be struck through. So whenever I get a piece out of it, it's mostly dyed already, the front surface and the back, but I still have to go back over these edges anywhere where I've cut it. Another thing, if you're doing a lot of these, you can get various little devices similar to the slicker that fit in drill presses or buffers or anything like that you can sit and just basically run the strap over it. For just making one like this, a little slicker like this works okay. My preference on any straight straps is I just use canvas scraps. And the canvas, after it's been used a bunch of times, it gets nice and slick and smooth. Really provides enough friction that actually, if you're not careful on a larger strap, you can almost burn yourself doing this. But that burnishes the edges, I think, rather nice. And it's pretty quick, because you're basically doing both edges at the same time, just pulling it through. I think it helps break the strap in a little bit too. And if you want, you can go back over and really round it out with your slicker a little bit more, just for that final polish. Now, next step, I'm going to go ahead and use the sewing machine to do this, just because it's a lot quicker. But I'm going to fold these over, wrap them through that ring, and stitch on each side of the strap down away from that ring. Now I have a sewing machine, so I go ahead and use a sewing machine to stitch stuff up like this, but this could easily be hand stitched, probably take 15 minutes, half an hour, depending on how fast you are at hand stitching. Or you could just put a couple rivets in it, just like I'm going to do on the end for the buckle, which is going to be the next bit. But there's our center ring all in there, set up the way it should be, nice and tight. Just remember, it's best to scag these ends off so that this comes out nice and neat with no lump or bump here. Make it comfortable for whoever or whatever you're putting it on. I do know people that wear these collars too. I don't ask questions. Now, the buckle in, we're just going to use a slot punch or bag punch. Punch out the part for the buckle tongue to go through. Some holes for some rivets. Fold it back on itself. I can be sure to get it lined. And just use the number 2 hole punch. Pop some holes through there real quick. And then it's assembly time. Let's go ahead and make sure we put our D-ring on first. If you go ahead and put the buckle on and then set a rivet and realize that you didn't put the D-ring on, you got to take it apart. Because you can't just slide it down the strap with this round ring in the center. Tight fit on that buckle. Now again, this is like 10 to 12 ounce leather. If you're putting together 2 pieces of 8 ounce leather, you can usually get away with a medium one of these rivets. If anything thicker than that, you have to go to a large. What I'm probably going to wind up doing is, since this guy has been tapered down, is I'll probably need a large rivet here and then a medium rivet further down. And working on the edge of your slab or edge of your table makes it easier to set one close to a buckle like this, because then the buckle's not in your way. And our D-ring up. Alright, and then that should be the basics of what we're doing here. We got one little more decorative element to do, as requested on this one. This is kind of going to be a punk rock sort of dog collar. The element that I'm going to be adding onto this by request is somebody wanted some spikes on this dog collar. Something you don't see real often anymore. But I have these. They look like they're screws, but they're not. That's actually like a ring shank sort of rivet. And then these little spikes that we're going to rivet on here. So I need to lay out where I want to put those. I think 3 or 4 of them on each side. And then we'll set those in there. Now these little spikes, they come in a screw back version and they come in this rivet back version. They're pretty easy to set. The rivet back ones, it just, the rivet goes up through the leather. And then you have the spike, just drives down onto it. We'll see if this one will set. It might be a little tight. We might have to do some skiving or something. And the setter is just, it's got a conical shape to it. So it just fits right on top of the spike. Alright. One spiky dog collar. I normally don't personally like spikes on the dog collar because, well, when you go to pet a dog, sometimes you wind up with a spike instead. But it was a request by my niece for her dog, whose name is Rock, that a spiky collar.